Well, that'll be great. It'll be a cold open. So this is excellent. Okay.
Okay, Suzanne's in the car. Please drive safely, Suzanne. I'm glad you can be here. Hope the pricing conversation doesn't get too exciting and steer you off your way.
That would be bad. Then that
That
would
would
be
be
a cost.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Danielle, thanks so much. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Janine. Hi, everybody. I'm Danielle Morris. I'm one of the things I've done in my life is I co-founded a think tank. Oh, when before half of the people were probably born, and that's called the VeraSage Institute. And VeraSage, the original mission was to eradicate the billable hours in the professions, mostly the CPA, lawyers, and advertising. We've been successful with several thousand firms around the world, but we've kind of moved on, and our future is really in the world of subscription models and ways to price. But we're going to have a conversation about pricing, right? So basically, we believe that pricing should be purposeful, and this is this course was originally designed for professionals, so people who historically bill by the hour, but all the things apply to whether you sell stuff or intangibles if you run a nonprofit, because it's ultimately about the customer experience at the end of the day. So we've got 2 or 3 hours worth of material here, so we won't get through it all. I will send to Janine a copy of the PDF deck, because there'll be lots of places that'll have questions that you should be thinking about and asking and about engaging yourself in as you meander. And Janine, I'll let you monitor chat if there are things that need to be discussed, and just chime in so that I will look at that towards the end. I'll try to stop somewhere before 1 o'clock and go there. And if we have to do a part two, that'll be fine. I do have one video in the middle of it that's not very long, but it reinforces items. So that's okay. Hang on here. Let's go figure out how come. There you go. Now I understand how to do this. I need to move, how do I move I'm going to move the visuals. Okay. So as we talk about pricing, Peter Drucker once said, because its purpose is to create a customer, the business enterprise only has really two, and he means really only two basic functions: marketing and innovation, because those are the items that drive results. They drive sales, they drive market share, they drive growth. Everything else is a cost. And what Drucker was meaning by that is management needs to focus on cost accounting, finance, bookkeeping, uh, payroll, manufacturing, efficiencies and processes. But all of those are lagging indicators, and none of them drive the customer experience. They can add to the customer experience, but really the construct of building a market is going to be really about forward thinking. As entrepreneurs, frequently we have to do all of it. We're the janitor, and we're the marketing person, and we're the salesperson, and we're the after customer care person. Some of us run bigger organizations, some of us have nonprofit organizations. But when we're really talking about the strategy associated with pricing for purpose and having purposeful in our design, we need to realize that the marketing aspect of this is integrated in there. Pricing is really a communication tool, and it says a lot about you in where you're at and what you're going for. Ah, we have to, this is okay. So Andy Grove, said that, I'm going to shrink that. Andy Grove said the disruptive threats come inherently not from new technologies, but from new business models. Now, Andy Grove hasn't been CEO of Intel for far longer than 1 or 2 decades. And if you think about Intel today is in trouble. And what Andy Grove meant was, had they been thinking about new business models, they'd have been looking at AI as a different business model than core processors. And they may not have stopped NVIDIA, but they may have been 5 or 10 years ahead. And so what kept Andy Grove at night was the 20-year-old kid that was going to come up from behind them and change it. And again, you can be as efficient as you want to be with the hard things, but if you aren't out in front of your marketplace, you're going to be subject to threats. And that doesn't matter if your threats on the international scale of Intel or if you're, a food cart in a food pod in downtown Portland, right? The threats still exist, and it's the new business model that we should be thinking about. And Drucker also, so one of the things that we talk about in getting people up to kind of a core language is our foundationals of our firm's business model is, people talk about our purpose, but that's bigger than our tactics. It's bigger than strategy. It's really what's in our DNA, and it's what we don't have to really think about. That is what our purpose is. What drives us is the purpose. So when people talk about what my purpose is, we use those kinds of definition. Strategy is what our special skills are as it relates to staying one step ahead of being efficient. And in Verisage language, we're not so excited about your efficiency. We really care greatly about your effectiveness, because when you're effective, you're doing the right thing, even if it's inefficient. I want you to think about a visit to Disneyland or Disney World. It's not efficient as it relates to running rides to have Disney have characters running around the park, but it's hyper effective to have Pluto and Mickey and Minnie and Goofy and the characters writing in people's books. So we want you to think about being effective as it's related to your strategy. When you're positioning yourself, it's where the intersection of your crosshairs of being something for someone. What is it that we're doing in our position? Are we going to be middle market, up market, down market? Are we going to be a price-led group? Are we going to be a value-led group? Are we going to be unique and rare and custom, or are we going to be mass and being produced? Right? You can be highly successful like Walmart or Target and be price-led strategies, or you can be highly customized like McKinsey or Deloitte or Price Waterhouse or a very fine French or a Michelin-starred restaurant isn't going to be scaling for hundreds of dinners. They're going to be doing things for tens and 20s. And then when we look at our revenues and our pricing models, are asking our customers to pay for it. In other words, if you aren't being paid for it, is it really part of your core offering? And how much are we asking our customers to pay? So we need to start thinking about what our price says in the marketplace. And that's really one of the things that we want to look at. Going back to Drucker, says that customers never buy a product. They can only buy a satisfaction of a want. The customer buys value. This was described to me, I don't know, 30 years ago, when it was described that nobody ever went to Home Depot to buy a drill bit, because nobody wants a drill bit. What they want was a hole. If they could get a hole without going to Home Depot and without buying a drill bit, they would do that. So when you're thinking about your product mix and your marketing mix and your pricing analysis, what is it that you're solving for your customer by selling them X but giving them Y? And that's part of the whole challenges. And that's why we want people to get away from what we call cost plus pricing, or what my neighbor charges for pricing. If I'm in the food cart business and I'm selling Mediterranean Greek food and I have a gyro and there are 3 other carts in my pod and they're all selling gyros at $7.95, why can't I come up with what would I have to do to have a $10.95 gyro? Or am I more competitive to be a $6.95? But if I drop my price $1, will they just match me? And all I'm doing is drawing our margins down. So what is it that we're selling beyond just the mere tangible or intangible product? So there are some maxims that we think about, and value in our definition is really what is theoretically the maximum amount a consumer is going to pay for an item. Now, this isn't about ripping anybody off. It's not about revenue maximization. It's about making sure that we understand what they may be willing to pay. And the truth is, our customers aren't going to walk into our enterprises and say, I'm willing to pay a top dollar of X for your product when you're willing to sell it X less 20%. they're not going to give away that margin to you. Think about the negotiations that we do when we buy big ticket items, cars, jewelry, negotiating houses. The seller isn't telling you what their really rock bottom price is, and the buyer never tells you what their ultimate high price is. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that there's a profit for the seller and there's a profit for the buyer. And as a business owner, we need to have these conversations, and they're really important. Once we have that understanding, we need to realize that the first rules of value is all value is subjective. What what it's worth to you is not what it's worth to me. It's why some people buy, less expensive cars. Some people buy bicycles. Some people only do an Uber. Some people have very expensive cars. Even though they can all be a transportation to get me from where I am to where I want to be, the challenge is what it is. So I'm in Los Angeles today. I flew down this morning from Portland, and I know that there were people who paid 40 or 50 different price points out of the 170 seats, and nobody was arguing because we each had a different reason to come to LA. My seatmate and her family, they were going to Cancun, so they were on vacation. They were all excited. I was coming down for work. Same plane, same service, same destination, different reasons. So the subjective nature of my travel would determine how much I was willing to pay, whether I was willing to pay for an upgrade or take a middle seat or have my bag checked. All of those things are subjective to the time and the place that I'm in. So I want us to think about something for a moment. If Let's just look at water. So we have a plain water bottle. We took the label off, I'm sure. But I want you to think about the cost and the price and the value of water. We know, for example, if I don't have any water, I die. And I know if I have too much water, I drown. So I'm the same person, right? But my transformation as to what I'm willing to pay for water will determine on the circumstances, my subjectivity of my nature, and what the use of the water will be. So for example, if I'm at a Trailblazer game and I want water, I might be willing, this is a long time ago, $4.50 for bottled water, 50 cents more than regular soda, which is mostly water, right? So I'm willing to pay more money for that water than I would be willing to pay for the water that's washing my dog. My dog is important to me, but I would never pay $4.50 per pint to wash my dog. And then if I unfortunately lived in a place that had a flood, right, I'm actually going to pay someone to take the water away from me. And it's all water. Ignore the dirt, but it's all water. So the same thing, right, will have different value to me. One of them very valuable to me, one for washing my dog, and then of course one is to pay somebody to get the water out of my basement because it's causing me pain. So we shouldn't be looking at our products in a static mode. We have to recognize that our products are frequently purchased by people in different walks of life, different aspects of what they're doing, and they're trying to solve multiple things. I don't have a slide on this, but I want you to think about the 4 ways we can spend money. I can spend my money on me. And if I do, I'm going to seek great value, not cheap price necessarily, but great value. I can spend my money on you in the form of a gift. I need to get good enough value. I need to think that this is something that'll be important that says I gave it to you. And if I can't really think what that is, I can just give you the money. And that's why gift cards are such a successful venture, because it allows me to allow you to make the choice and I don't have to do it. I can spend your money on me. So think about that you're traveling for your employer, you're on an expense account, you're going to go to dinner, and whatever the fancy special of the day is, you're going to benefit from it. So you order that, even though you might not have ever ordered that special when you were spending your own money, because it's other people's money and we're spending it on me, and therefore I get the benefit from it. So I'm more apt to spend. And airlines, going back to our airline, for example, airlines know that. A long time ago, if you wanted cheap flights, you had to fly on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or and a Saturday night stay, because that's a tourist, not a business person. A business person wants to get home. So they're spending other people's money. Airlines understood that. They were able to extract a higher price and enhance their revenue and be able to provide cheaper fares for tourists. It worked. The fourth way to spend money is other people's money on other people. So your money on somebody else. And that's in a way when people pick on government, and I'm not picking on government, it's easy to do that today, but we're not going to pick on government. But when people come in and say, how could the government have spent, I don't care, X amount of dollars on that toilet seat in that fancy Air Force plane, that's just really stupid. Well, there's a lot of behind that in reality, but the person making the decision, spending the government's money or the taxpayers' money in this case, on a product that they won't use or see, they just don't want hassles, right? And brands understood that. IBM and Xerox and old brands understood that if you didn't get fired if you were at Price Waterhouse and you hired IBM for your computers because no one would think your judgment was wrong. So just in the back of your mind, think about who's spending the money. If you deal with entrepreneurs like I do for the most part, well, they're spending their own money, they're value conscious. If you interface with big companies and you're dealing with purchasing departments, they're spending other people's money and they're probably not benefiting. They just don't want hassles. So you got to think about the pricing psychology of who and what we're dealing with. So I mentioned before that you have to profit and your customer has to profit in every engagement. So in every economic transaction, we have our cost. And if we can't sell enough product at a decent enough margin to cover our costs, we're bankrupt. So we have to do that. That's a table stake, right? The real question is, your customer values our product. Our customers value our outcomes in our products far more than our costs. And ultimately, the decision we have to think about in our pricing is, how can I extract as much of that additional margin, what we call the consumer surplus, if you go back to Econ 101, without impinging on the customer's profit to a degree that they decide it's not worth it. And this is all art. And you can try things and you can experiment. If you think about how hotels work or airlines and their dynamic pricing and adaptive capacities, Marriott's known for not renting out a vacant hotel room late at night if it doesn't meet their minimum prices, because they need to keep price integrity and they don't want to reward bad consumer behaviors. A long time ago, I had a tax division that was designed to compete more on H&R Block, and we ran a Groupon ad, and they were the worst pile of customers ever, because these were coupon shoppers who coupon clip. They're not loyal, they're price sensitive, and I gave away probably 75% of my revenue between the discount to get them in the door and the commission split with Groupon. If you're a restaurant and you can do that, you can try it every once in a while, but you want to be more selective in your loyalty programs as you're giving away coupons. You want to connect it and not just make it flush, in my view. Again, Janine, don't forget that if there's a need to chime in, please do. So when we think about price is what you pay, but value is what you get, according to Warren Buffett. Value is subjective and indivisible. It's a cumulative conversation. A transaction can only take place when the buyer and the seller disagree about value. I often would say, the only thing I can look at, if you have an orange and your friend has $1 and the friend gives you the $1 and you give them the orange, is that the friend valued the orange more than the $1 and you valued the $1 more than the orange. There's nothing else I can determine about it. I don't know if the friend would have paid $2 or if you would have accepted 50 cents. but you both have to disagree about the value, because if you agree to the value the same, you likely aren't going to have the transaction. Even when I agree to pay $3 for an item or $300 for an item, it just means that the other side was willing to take the 300 and give up what they had. So I want you to think about that kind of conversation. Pricing is how we divide up value. So when people complain about the high price of gasoline or other commodities, I look at it and say, well, but the nice thing about it is price determines how to allocate scarce resources across our economy. If we price them all the way down, we're interfering with that price allocation. And it may not be fair if you're poor and you need to have more gas. This isn't about fairness per se, but price is a great way to deal with value. And value's a feeling, it's not a number. Value's a feeling, it's not a number. Price is a story. How we got to the price is a story, but I will know it if it's intrinsic and inherent and inside my stomach, so to speak. It feels good. Time doesn't have a value, and time doesn't have a cost. Time is a constraint. I can do things swiftly. I can do them over length of time. The old adage is there are three legs to a stool. When I'm dealing with a customer, they can have it fast, they can have it cheap, and they can have it good. And the customer can choose two of those legs, but they don't get to choose all three. So you can have it fast and good, but then we're going to talk about the price. You can have it fast and cheap, and now we'll talk about the quality. That's all. It's just simple stuff. No such thing as value billing, because billing's done in arrears, pricing's done up front. So if you are in a services industry that tends to bill by the hour, or if you price your product in arrears after the fact, you're billing, and that's not value. You're going to try to extract what you think is fair, but it wasn't a price. A price is something that's done up front. And there is a great nobility of being paid what we feel we are worth, right? How often have you sold something or delivered a product or a service or delivered something and you're going, they don't appreciate what I did for them. And you need to be paid accordingly. You need to be paid in something that's valuable. So cost-led pricing says, and this is what historically people have done, whether you use a cost plus markup, a key point, an hourly rate, some form of margin plus. You start with the service and you deliver it, you accumulate your costs like barnacles on the bottom of a ship. You then determine what your price is on some form of a model, and you pray at that moment, you pray that the value that the customer has is greater than the price that you propose. If not, you're going to cut your price, because this is how this works. The consumer has the power when you've already delivered the service. Got to have a pricing up front. And in all candor, you need to let some of the customers walk away, because if you're filling 100% of your orders, you aren't pushing the pricing at the margin enough. So I want you to think about Farniente wine, for example. Classic California Chardonnays and red wines, fancy label, great boxes, beautiful property. The cost of the material of the wine is irrelevant to the value of the bottle. The price of the wine is based on the emotional side that I'm having this wine. And I've got a 3-minute clip with Rory Sutherland here in a moment. And in that clip, Rory, who used to be the global vice chair of Ogilvy, said that, look, in wine economics, except for the super, super, super few that really can differentiate wine, the price determines the value. The price determines the quality. $2 Chuck, bad. $500 Chateau Rothschild, good. And the truth is, if you put them in a blind taste test, they might come out the same. You could put the Rothschild in the $2 Chuck bottle and people would tell you it's crap. So that's in the real world, and that has to do with behavioral economics. So the difference between pricers people who think about this and what we refer to as cost accountants is this Rory Sutherland piece. So let me see if this works.
I've got an example here from Canada. There was a young intern at Ogilvy, Canada, called Hunter Somerville, who was working in improv in Toronto and got a part-time job in advertising and was given the job of advertising Shreddies. Now, this is the most perfect case of creating intangible added value without changing the product in the slightest. Shreddies is a strange square whole grain cereal only available in New Zealand, Canada, and Britain. It's Kraft's peculiar way of rewarding loyalty to the crown. In working out how you could relaunch Shreddies, he came up with this.
Shreddies is supposed to be square.
Have any of these diamond shapes got in?
New Diamond Shreddy cereal. The same 100% whole grain wheat in a delicious diamond shape.
Now, I'm not sure this is the most perfect example of intangible value creation. All it requires is photons, neurons, and a great idea to create this thing. And I have to say, it's a work of genius, but naturally, you can't do this kind of thing without a little bit of market research.
So Shreddies is actually introducing a new product, which is something very exciting for them. So they're introducing new diamond Shreddies. It's interesting. I just want you to dots there. So I just want to get your first impressions when you see that. You see the diamond Shreddy box there.
Thanks, Winner. I'm a little bit confused.
It's all it's all in the appearance, but it's kind of like thinking about a 6 or a 9, like a 6. You flip it over, it looks like a 9, but a 6 is very different from a 9. And now we're going to W, exactly.
Actually, when you don't see, like when I sat there, I think you just look like you're turning on its end, but when you see like that, it's more interesting. Like it
Just try both of them. Hit a square on your first. First one, the first one.
Now, naturally, actually, debate raged. There were conservative elements in Canada, unsurprisingly, who actually resented this intrusion. So eventually, the manufacturers actually arrived at a compromise, which was the combo pack. Now, if you think it's funny, bear in mind there's an organization called the American Institute of Wine Economics, which actually does extensive research into perception of things and discovers that except for among perhaps 5 or 10% of the most knowledgeable people, there is no correlation between quality and enjoyment in wine, except when you tell the people how expensive it is, in which case they tend to enjoy the more expensive stuff more. So drink your wine blind in future. Now, I've got an example here from Canada.
So I hope that came across. I hope that was you could hear it. So that's Rory Sutherland. Let me go back here. Sorry. That was Rory Sutherland who I'm trying to close the chat. That was Rory Sutherland, and you can find that on YouTube or Google. Watching him, if you've got 25 minutes, Google Rory Sutherland Zeitgeist. That's a Google presentation that's probably now 15 or 20 years old, but it's about this kind of stuff, this behavioral economics. So cost-led pricing we've already talked about. Service, cost, price, value leads to the customer. Now, value-led pricing, things I want you to think about is start with the customer, because no two customers are the same. And what is it that they're valuing? And once you know what they value, you can establish a price. And then you can make sure that the cost that you have to deliver that product at a higher value is achievable and still make a profit. And then you can deal with your service. And the best example of this are with 2 cars. Car number 1, built by General Motors, actually Chevy. They built the Corvette starting in the early 1930s 50, 51, I think, somewhere in there. And it's been continuously there, and it's made profits, and they priced it under what they call the DuPont cost plus pricing model, which said whatever it costs for them to do it, then they added a margin, and then they took it to the market, and they've sold cars. Come on, this is a car that's 70 plus years old. I mean, that's a success in the car market. Let's give them that, right? It may not be for you, but it's a successful car. Ford, when Lee Iacocca, who made the Mustang, he had listened to the market. The market said that Corvette's really cool, but it's expensive. And so he asked them, well, what would you want? Well, we want a sporty look, but we don't need to have a sporty car. So they used a Fairlane and they put a weak engine in it, but they made it look cute and sporty. And Ford made $1.6 billion in the 1960s in like 18 months with the Ford Mustang. And it took Chevy to the mid 1970s before they made $1 billion+ in profit. Because Ford started with the customer, and then Iacocca told his engineers, can you build me a car with these features and such that we can sell it at this price and still make a profit? And the engineers scratched their head and said they'll come back. And that's why the Mustang was so successful, because they listened to the customer. So we want you to think about value-led pricing. So there are multiple steps to effective pricing. We want you to have a value conversation with the customer. You need to find out what it is that they want and what is it that they're going to need. And you're going to have this conversation regardless of when you price. If you price in arrears, you're going to have it, because that's when you're going to find out, when the rubber meets the road, whether or not they believe what you delivered was worthwhile. You need to price the customer and not the services. So this says that each customer is unique. So this would be in essence a menu in a restaurant that would be adaptive based on my time of day, my eating habits, the kinds of things that I want, rather than a set menu. Might be difficult to do, but if you started to think about it, you want to price me and not just the mere product, because you're going to be two things. You may overprice me, give me more bells and whistles. If you think about it, we all think about, the old days when we had VCRs. They have great technology, most of which none of us ever did. We either went to the video place, and well, VCR may be a little bad analogy for this group. DVD. I don't need all the fancy things that my oven has and my microwave have to make popcorn and reheat my old meal, right? It's really cool. It's like the new computers. I don't use it all, but they should price me, the customer, and not the services. You need to develop pricing options. And we'll have some slides on this, but you need to think about bundling, and you need to think about what Sears Roebuck did when they were successful. They provided a good, better, and best product offering. So if you remember the 4 ways we spend money, I might choose different models. You want to give me options, and price is just one of those. Terms is one of those. Speed of delivery is one of those. Quality of the product. Do I get more of it? Do I get, if I'm like the Geek Squad, do I get 4-hour turnaround, 4-day turnaround, or do I have to take it to Best Buy? Those kinds of issues. You need to present the options to the customer. They should make choices, and we'll have a slide on that if I can get to it in behavioral economics. And you sometimes need to have a stupid option. So you need to have a good price, a lower price, and maybe a stupid option in the middle, because the stupid option helps the customer frame which one they really want. We need to take that option selected, and we need to codify it in some form of a contract, a pricing agreement, a consultant's agreement, some form of a scope and services, so that you know what you're going to deliver and they know what they're going to receive. Yeah, you got to project manage whatever it is that you're doing, whether that's just store opening hours or whether that's complex, Gantt charts and PERT charts and all the things that you're going to do. You need to watch scope creep, because consumers who are doing customized products ask anybody who's remodeling a house, if they're a remodeling contractor, they love scope creep, because those are change requests and orders, and they can price the customer really high. There's an image out there in the internet that's got a small dinghy and it says original contract, and it's got a big boat next to it that says change orders. But if you don't capture scope creep, you are going to give away your margin and you're going to invest more into this relationship than the price that they paid. And that's wrong. And most importantly, I don't care. Find your spouse, find a friend, find your colleague, and do an after action review about pricing, that we price this here. What did we do well, and should we continue to do it? And where did we miss? Where were the tells from the consumer that they wanted something different? We have to do that. So Michael Hammer says, a professional is someone who's responsible for achieving a result rather than a task. This goes along with the concept that says results are rewarded in heaven, excuse me, efforts are rewarded in heaven, results matter down here on earth. And I don't care whether you're a professional trucker, a restaurateur, a lawyer, a consultant, or a doctor. Professionalism is a mental perspective. I'm going to deliver the results that it matters. I'm not going to be a cog in the system it's only responsible for the task at hand, but I have no idea about the process. So Dr. House says, hey, if you're going to start helping a consumer, first rule of medicine, do no harm. Let's not hurt our consumers. And deciding what they want before we know what their diagnosis is malpractice. So if you're a lawyer and you give answers that they haven't really answered yet because you haven't evaluated, or if you're a doctor and you're providing prescriptions before you know what their ill is, or if you're a nonprofit and you're delivering services to your caseworker or your case clients without understanding their entire totality, we may be harming them because we may be we may be prescribing without diagnosing, even though you may be materially correct. So we have to think about scope of value. Think about that before you define scope of work. If you reverse it, you're going to be in the cost-based pricing. You're going to do the work and you haven't ascertained the value, and you really need to have a value conversation. So I want to give you that an example for you. Here's your home. It's a beautiful home. It's got a good looking front yard, but you're looking for a new landscaper. And the landscaper, the first one comes in and says, hey, I will show up every week. I'll cut your grass. I'll blow your leaves. And, depending on how long I'm there, I'll charge you $75 an hour for my services. Okay. The second landscaper shows up and says, I'll tell you what, I'll show up. I'll mow your grass, I'll edge, I will take care of your leaves, and 3 or 4 times a year, when you ask me, I'll swap out your seasonals, and I'll do that for $300 a month. Okay, now I have a fixed price. That's, can I perceive that the other person at $75 an hour is going to average for 4 hours, and I have stability. And then the third one shows up, and the third one says, I'll tell you what, I will see you have the best looking yard in the entire neighborhood, and I'll guarantee that. And my price is $750 a month. Which one would you choose? Well, most likely you'll choose the second one, because the third one's never, ever, ever showed up at my house, because they don't exist. But I want you to think about what it would take for you. That's called an anchoring, by the way, and we'll talk about anchoring hopefully in about 15 minutes. I want you to think about how you present your options, and that's really where we're at. So, and again, you'll get copies of this. I have a list of all the ways that you can start to look about how we can create value, from increasing revenues and market shares, reducing costs, improving their productivity, and creating strategies. These are for consultants, but you can change these words for any line of business. What can you increase, reduce, improve, and create? And start creating your list and start having that marketing conversation so you can get the readback of the value that the consumer cares about, and you can capture it with a fair price. So there's also what they call spiritual value. Do you provide expertise? Do you have a unique social capital? Can you bridge somebody to a conversation? I was on I was meeting with the director of state-based policy for advocates for transgender equality earlier today for TE, and I sit on their national board. And she said, you know, we have a very good relationship with Senator Markley. What we need is we need one better with Wyden. Well, I may be able to help provide that. So while I'm a volunteer, the question becomes, that's a specialist expertise or knowledge. So there's a whole list of areas that you may be able to provide that's a spiritual value that may not be a productive value, but you could do this. Maybe you're a massage therapist, but your massage room and your waiting room and your aftercare is such a pleasant experience that people are willing and able to pay a premium price for that service. Okay, so what can we do in the spiritual case? We want you to think about a great opening question, especially if you're doing consulting, you know, doing something in the technical spaces, or you're absolutely customizing what you do. We will only undertake this engagement if we can agree to our mutual satisfaction that the value we are creating is greater than the price we are charging you. Is that acceptable? Get the consumer to buy in and say, yeah, that's a great way to have this conversation, because you need to find out what it is that they want, because they know that if they talk too much, they're not going to get the cheapest price. And if you talk too much, you're giving away free advice. So it's a balance. Eric Hoffer was a longshoreman in Los Angeles, or excuse me, San Francisco. And he says, language was invented to ask questions. Answers may be given by grunts and gestures, but questions must be spoken. They could be written, by the way, but humanness came of age when man asked the first question. Social stagnation results not from a lack of answers, but from the absence of the impulse to ask questions. One thing I think about ChatGPT and its similar AI generated large language models is it's going to teach generations to ask better questions. Because if you ask better questions, you'll get better recommended answers. So you as a marketing person, you as an entrepreneur, you need to be really good at asking questions in such a manner to have people open up and provide the answers regardless of how they answer it. So then there are a whole series of questions that you are to ask. And again, I'll put these in the PowerPoint or the PDF so you can have them. But in essence, you want to pull from people, hey, what do you expect from us? I ask people, if I gave you a magic wand and allowed you to make what was ever unjust just, what would that be? What would it be that makes you whole or succinct or complete? And then I want to try to find a way to deliver that. Because if I do, I'm not only going to get great pricing, but I'm going to feel really good as a service provider helping them out. And that's one of the things I think is there. So a great question is, what keeps you awake at night? Okay. So those kinds of questions. And there are like 3 pages of these. So just know that they'll be in your PowerPoint deck. Okay. So this is another one I like. If we were able to attend some of your internal management meetings as observers, would you be comfortable with that? Especially if you're going to be helping guide, you're going to be a change agent for them. And I can confirm to you that the answers you'll get if the boss is in the room, or if you're in the room with your team members, is different if you're not there, or if the boss is not there. That's why these undercover boss movies are always informational, because we hide things, right? We don't want to disappoint the boss, right? Then there are what we call the golden questions. And we want you to think about it. First of all, how do you measure whatever it is that you're looking for? And I don't think that McKinsey's right. You can't measure all things, but how do you gauge where you're there? What is it now? What would you like it to be? And what's it worth to get from here to there? Now, those are questions that we as business people can can form about. So we want you to price the customer because I want you to give this, just look at this real quick and we'll go through it. So if I have 100 passengers willing to pay 400 and 100 passengers willing to pay 200, if I price them all at 400, I get 40 grand. If I price them all at 200, I'm willing to get 40 grand. But if I price 100 at 400 and 100 at 200, I get 60 grand. So just recognizing I want to price the customers, and that's what the airlines do. That's what hotels do. That's what rental car companies do. It's what people who've got a sliding scale are able to do. I think that's really important. Okay. I want you to think about the value once we have the value conversation, but it's always subjective, but they're contextual. So we're familiar with American Express. They have the green, the gold, the platinum. The green used to be like 50 or 75 bucks a year, and the gold was like $200 a year, and the platinum was like $400 or $500 a year. And you can buy the same hotel experience with each. But if you want the concerts or something that American Express only gives to their gold, they make you actually have to pay the money. They don't give the concerts to the green. But if you want the concierge line or the fine dining or the ability to get your money back from checked bag fees, you've got to pay for the platinum card. And what they're doing is they're saying these are different pricing tiers, and I can't give you the benefit from the upper tier at the lower price. And they're willing to forego and frustrate people who are cheap, who are unwilling to do that. I want you to think about how you can bundle that. I want you to think about how you can provide options. Think about car washes. $21.99 for platinum, $16.99 for gold. And notice they kind of highlight that. And silver's $11.99. So we can sell cheap car washes, middle of the road car washes, or fancy car washes. And I guarantee you most people who go there buy gold or platinum. So they provide the cheap one as an anchor for the people who are just want to get an exterior wash, but they extract. And I guarantee you that whatever it is that they do for the pluses, it doesn't cost them $5. It's probably about $1 worth of material, and it's a much more margin business. These are successful tactics. Dan Ariely has written several books beyond this, but his Predictably Irrational is an excellent book. Now, Dan Ariely has fallen out of favor a little bit. Some of his research may have been a little bit aggressive. We'll just leave it at that. I think that his perspective is right, but you can find Dan Ariely all over TED Talks and YouTube. But they ran an experiment that said you can buy The Economist magazine, and they gave them 3 options: web for $59, print only for $125, or print and web for $125. And when they did the studies, 84% of the people chose print and web, and only 16% did the web only. Okay, and nobody bought just the print only for $125 because that's what we call the stupid option, right? But when they took away the stupid option and they said you can have the web or the print and web, more people chose just the web. And the difference was 42.8% in additional revenues in the market by providing what we call the dumb option. So I want you to experiment a little bit. Think about what you can provide that nobody would probably buy, but it'll help them frame. Because when I put the print only in there, it made print and web more valuable. That's just the realities of what it was. So a guy named Van Westerhoff says, hey, look, you should think about at what price this is too expensive and not buy it, at what price is too cheap, and they most likely will buy it. At what price it's too cheap, it's still likely to buy it, but at what price is it too cheap and not buy it? In other words, if I said, hey, look, I've got a car and it's $100, people are going to go, why? Right? Whereas that same car at $1,000, they might say, well, it's just old, right? Or that same car at $200,000, that's too much. So you can start to ask these kinds of questions. I'm going to let you look at on the PDF the 20 questions to ask yourself before setting a price. But I do want you to think about this. You know, one of the ones I look at is who referred the customer to me. If it was a cheap customer who they referred, a cheap person, right? Or What is the pain that they're causing it? I always try to find out, why is a customer in front of me today? What is it that was different than yesterday that brought them to me today? And if I can try to ascertain that, I can look at some things before I start to set the price. But we have 20 questions we want you to think about as it relates to setting a price. I'm going to go by that. Couple of last things before I move on. I want you to think about anchoring. So if you're walking through the mall and you see Prada, they put the $10,000 fancy Oscar type gown in the window. And when you walk inside, you now start looking at $2,000 and $3,000 gowns, and that makes, and because the $10,000 gown set the frame, the $2,000 gown feels like a better deal. So one of the things people learned, if you want to sell expensive boats, market them at places they sell airplanes. Because when you look at a $40 million Gulfstream, you know, that $2 million yacht looks like a deal, right? So these are part of the pricing psychology. Red Bull knew that they were going to have something there, but they didn't want to create a Coca-Cola can, so they made a different sized vessel. So something about framing. It wasn't a soda, it was Red Bull. What we refer to in the smile curve, what I really want to have here is the value added is at the beginning and the end, our concepts, our research, our branding, and our aftermarket and our sales. It's not in the process of getting done what we want to do. That's the gist of this. And I know I'm hustling because I'm going to try to get to the end. And I want to open up some questions. There are 7 T's of aspects that we want you to think about. You can think about terms and turnaround and talent, technology, tailoring. How can you transference people? And of course, if you have to travel and out of pocket expenses. These are all things to figure out in your world of pricing. I want you to have 100% guarantee. I want you to be like Nordstrom. You bought it here, we'll take it back. I guarantee that people won't abuse you of it. If they do, then you can never do business with them again. But when you are offering an unconditional guarantee, it takes risk off the table. And when you take risk off the table, people are willing to pay you more money. And that's the gist of this. Macy's sells frequently the same things that Nordstrom sells, but Nordstrom sells it at a higher price and a better margin because they have a guarantee. A good price prices the right customer. It comprehends our value drivers. It knows the scope before doing the work. It recognizes the sooner that you price, the lower it'll be. It knows if you use a formula, it'll be lower, and it isn't the only negotiable item. And I don't like the word terrorist, but a good price is something that extracts. And don't set it by your dumbest competitors. Setting what your neighbor does is the neighbor. That's why I don't really like benchmarking. I really don't like Beckham. And remember to price the customer, not the service, and it has to benefit everybody in the food chain. I'm going to skip presenting your pricing because you can read that on your own. And I want you to do after action reviews. I'm going to skip that. I want you to think about this. The 3 factors of production: land, labor, capital. In land, we get rents, labors, we have wages. In capital, we have interest income. But where do profits come from? Profits come from risk. If you don't take those 3 and put them out there, you won't be able to capture a great price. As a reminder, there's always someone who will do it cheaper. Here we have the tattoo artist drawing what I could draw when the person who wants the tattoo wants something beautiful. So remember, there's always someone who will do it cheaper than you. Okay? So I don't want you to be a commodity. I want you to be what Drucker. Don't solve problems. I want you to pursue opportunities. I'm connected to Verisage. They have a radio show called The Soul of Enterprise. My colleague Ron Baker and Paul Dunn have written books called Time's Up. We're going to do something in May for subscriptions. And that's the end of the program. I know I've only got 5 or 6 minutes for questions, but I'm going to stop sharing and I'll send this to Janine and she'll get it out. Okay. Hi. Hi, Jill. Hi, everybody. Okay. You can go off mute if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them, and I'll do the best I can. And we'll have another one of these sessions, and it's all about subscriptions.
Danielle,
Over.
I absolutely loved the presentation. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge there. It was just as much a master class in pricing as it also is in honestly strong sales techniques, where of course pricing your contracts, services, or proposals are really a key element of that conversation. One of the questions that I wanted to ask related to when you're pricing the value that's provided to the customer, I totally get wanting to shake free from, well, what's it going to cost me? And trying to like build up from cost. I completely agree with starting with the value to the customer. What safeguards do you need to have to prevent from a customer that probably isn't worth your while from like entering into your fray and your conversation because maybe the customer circumstances mean that you can only price so high, but you don't want to create a contract that creates a loss for you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And I mean, and so this is customer selection and customer retention. So when in one of those slides I talked about one of the questions was who referred the customer, right? And where did they come out with? I mean, candidly, rich people hang out with rich people, poor people hang out with poor people. It's just that's that's what I refer to as the Van Gogh brush, right? That's an impressionistic view of art. It's not a Polaroid. But I think the way you do that is you have to ask those kinds of questions. What are your pain points? What is my budget for this? In other words, not what your budget is, but what is it you're willing to allocate to me? And if they say, well, wow, what did you pay your prior? I mean, in my CPA world, right? What did you pay for last year's tax return? Wow, they were really expensive and they were $900. And I might have a minimum price maybe for that product of $5,000. And I say, well, I want to help you. 900 may have been an excellent price. We have a minimum entry price of $5,000. And if that's too much, I get it. And I think that's just one of those ways. You're gonna have the pricing conversation. You might as well invest an hour or two up front, and then that's just your marketing effort and find out and give people clues when you're telling the stories about how you've helped other people who may rhyme with their problems and say, this was it. And I mean, I had a wonderful audit. The audit was complex. It was tough. I saved the taxpayer about $3 million. And I said at the end of the expensive engagement, they gave me an additional tip of $150,000. And it's true, they did. And happily do that. So I want them to know, ooh, Danielle's really expensive, but she delivers results, right? Now, not everybody can have that. So you have a little bit of an ego. So it's a conversation. So in the PowerPoint deck, you'll get, these are conversations to have. You need to ask these kinds of questions. I mean, think about when you go to the doctor, right? The doctor says before they ever see you, gee, have you had asthma? Are you pregnant? Are you gonna be pregnant? I mean, and they actually ask that regardless if they're males or females or in between. They ask all these, what's your family history? Because they don't know you. They're trying to gather that. You should do the same thing, right? What are the indicators of a good customer for you? One of the ones I used early in my career was, what charities do you support? I don't really care what they are, but I lived in the Silicon Valley and rich people weren't giving away any money, and that frustrated me. And if you were unwilling to help the community from which we survive, then I didn't want you, then you weren't a customer for me. Uh, you know, go
Great
find,
chat on customer selection. Love that.
yeah. Thank you, Jason. Nice to see you again, by the way.
Yes, pleasure.
Anybody else? I know that I dumped a lot at you. Janine will get the doc. She'll have it out. She'll have it tomorrow, and hopefully she'll send it to you. We'll share it. I Oh no, Janine's lost sound. Well, we just said that Janine will get it out to you today because she can't hear me promise that, right? But Jill heard it, so we'll be okay. I'm good. Janine, did you get it back? No, apparently not. Okay. we'll send the materials. If there's nobody else, I look forward to seeing everybody back in May when we talk about subscriptions. And if you're in Portland, we have a mixer on Thursday, right? So I'll have a table. Invite all your TGX and trans friends because I have materials for them. All right. Okay. Thank you.